It's not every day you get deputized by the U.S. Forest Service to fight a suburban mom in Lululemon. But then it's not every day you go to war with a woman who considers an unapproved birdbath an act of domestic terrorism. Her name was Carol, and she was the self-appointed queen of the Pristine Pines Homeowners Association. But in the annals of Scout Troop 86, a story now told in hushed, reverent tones around campfires, she would forever be known as HOA Karen. This whole saga didn't start with tactical vests and federal authority. It started, as so many suburban disasters do, in a church basement that smelled faintly of stale coffee, industrial-grade floor wax, and the quiet desperation of parents who'd rather be anywhere else. The air in the basement of St. Jude's Community Hall was thick enough to chew. It was our monthly Scout Troop 86 parent and scout meeting, an event I approached with the same enthusiasm as a root canal. My 10-year-old, Leo, however, lived for this stuff. He was sitting ramrod straight in his little khaki uniform, his face a mask of patriotic earnestness. Mr. Abernathy, our scoutmaster, stood at the front of the room. He was a good man, a man who believed in knots, merit badges, and the character-building properties of being eaten alive by mosquitoes. He was also, at this particular moment, sweating more than a marathon runner in a sauna. "As you all know," he began, nervously adjusting his glasses, "our annual father-son campout at Whispering Creek is, well, it's not happening." A collective groan went through the room. Leo's face, which had been beaming with excitement about sleeping on the ground and eating burnt hot dogs, crumpled. It was like watching a balloon deflate. "There was a scheduling conflict," Mr. Abernathy stammered. "A clerical error. The site's been double booked by a corporate wellness retreat." I leaned over to Dave, a fellow dad whose boundless optimism was both his greatest strength and most annoying quality. "A corporate wellness retreat?" I muttered. "They're probably doing trust falls and aligning their chakras on the same spot our kids were supposed to learn how to poop in the woods. This is a travesty." Dave chuckled. I continued, my voice a low grumble. "For what we pay in dues and fundraiser candy bars, you'd think they could secure a patch of dirt that isn't about to be overrun by middle managers named Chad. We could build a better campsite ourselves." It was a fatal mistake, a classic Jackism. My mouth writing a check my weekend was about to have to cash. Dave, whose hearing is apparently on par with a bat's, chose this moment to exercise his booming outdoor voice. "Hey, that's a great idea, Jack. Jack says we should build our own campsite." Every head in the room swiveled to me. Mr. Abernathy's eyes lit up with the desperate hope of a drowning man spotting a log. Leo looked at me like I had just personally promised to build him a Millennium Falcon out of popsicle sticks. "No, that's not what I started. But the train had already left the station, hit maximum velocity, and was hurtling toward a destination called manual labor. Before I could mount a defense, I was the newly appointed general contractor of the Dad Brigade. My mission, which I had no choice but to accept, was to lead a volunteer effort to build a permanent, three-sided Adirondack shelter for the troop. The location? A plot of land donated to the Scouts years ago by a local family, conveniently located at the edge of town, bordering the Green Mountain National Forest. It sounded idyllic. It sounded perfect. An hour later, I was in my garage, the scent of sawdust and motor oil a familiar comfort. The chaos of my contracting life was spread around me, saws, drills, levels, and a half-refinished oak table I'd been meaning to get to for 6 months. Spread out on my workbench were the blueprints for the shelter. It was a simple, rustic design, a glorified lean-to. A weekend job, I told myself. Maybe 2, if the weather turned. My crew had assembled. There was Dave, vibrating with an energy that suggested he'd mainlined 3 espressos. And there was Mark, an accountant by trade, who was looking at the blueprints with the same fearful reverence he usually reserved for an IRS audit. "Isn't this great?" Dave beamed, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to realign my spine. "We're like the A-team, but with more safety goggles and fewer explosions." "Right now, Dave, we're the F Troop," I said, pointing at the plans. "Okay, look. It's simple. We dig 6 post holes here, set the posts in concrete, frame it up, put on a roof. We can do this." Mark, ever the pragmatist, was peering at a different document, the donated land's plat map. He adjusted his glasses, his finger tracing a thin, dotted line on the paper. "Jack?" he said quietly. "Yeah, Mark?" "This edge of the property," he tapped the map. "It runs directly adjacent to something called the Pristine Pines Homeowners Association for about 200 feet. Dave scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "HOAs, please. That's just a bunch of people who get excited about Pantone-approved mailbox colors and write passive-aggressive notes about lawn gnomes. They won't bother us. We're building something for kids, for the community." Oh, Dave, you sweet, naive summer child. I should have been worried. A primal instinct, honed by years of dealing with persnickety clients and navigating Byzantine building codes, screamed at me. But then I looked at the simple, noble lines of the shelter on the blueprint. I thought of Leo's face. How it would light up when he saw something real and solid that his old man had built. I felt a genuine, if slightly begrudging, sense of purpose. This was for the kids. A chance to get away from screens and schedules, to teach them about hard work, about creating something tangible and lasting. What could possibly go wrong? It was a question I would soon be able to answer in excruciating, documented detail. A few days later, the 3 of us stood on the property. It was actually beautiful. The afternoon sun filtered through a thick canopy of pine and maple trees, dappling the forest floor. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. It was quiet, peaceful. The kind of place that made you want to take a deep breath and forget about mortgage payments and client phone calls. We walked toward the edge of the woods, toward the border of our designated battlefield. The transition was jarring. One second we were in a normal, untamed forest. The next, the ground became unnaturally flat and opened onto a lawn so green and uniform it looked like it had been rendered by a computer. There wasn't a weed, not a single brown patch. It was a carpet of intimidating perfection. Beyond the lawn stood a row of identical houses, all painted the same soul-crushing shade of greige. The only sound was the rhythmic hiss-thwack of sprinklers, turning in perfect, synchronized arcs. "Whoa," Dave said, his voice a whisper. "It's like the forest just stops." "This is Pristine Pines," Mark said, consulting his map as if it could protect him. "The line is right here." We got to work, using a simple string line and wooden stakes to mark out the corners for the shelter's foundation. Mark, in his element with numbers and straight lines, directed us with the precision of a brain surgeon. We were careful, triple-checking every measurement. The back corner of our planned structure was a good 15 feet from the property line, nestled safely in the woods. We were being good neighbors, responsible even. That's when we heard it. It started as a faint, high-pitched hum, a sound that didn't belong in the woods. It grew steadily louder, a synthetic whine cutting through the birdsong. I looked up and saw it. A gleaming white golf cart gliding silently over the perfect lawn, coming straight for us. At the helm was a woman who looked like she was genetically engineered in a lab that specialized in creating disapproving suburbanites. She had a blonde bob so severe it looked like it could cut glass, a white tennis visor pulled down low, and a pastel polo shirt tucked neatly into crisp white shorts. She pulled the cart to a stop, exactly on the edge of the lawn, its tires not daring to touch the unruly dirt of the woods. She fixed us with a look that could curdle milk. Can I help you, gentlemen?" Her tone was deceptively polite, but the subtext was clear. What are you vagrants doing near my perfect kingdom? Dave, ever the cheerful ambassador, stepped forward with a big smile. Hi there. We're with Scout Troop 86. Just doing a little surveying. We're going to build a camping shelter for the kids right here. Isn't that great? Her eyes narrowed to tiny slits. The smile did not reach them. A structure? She said, the word dripping with venom as if we'd just announced our intention to build a meth lab. I'm Carol, she announced, her voice all ice. I'm the president of the Pristine Pines Homeowners Association, and our covenants are very clear about unauthorized structures that could impact property values and sightlines. I decided to step in before Dave offered her a friendship bracelet. I held up my hands in a gesture of peace. Ma'am, I'm Jack. With all due respect, this isn't HOA land. We have the plat map right here. We're well on our side of the line. I gestured to our stakes, sitting innocently in the dirt. She gave my muddy work boots a look of profound disgust. The line, she said, drawing the words out as if explaining a complex theory to a simpleton, can be a matter of interpretation. You'll need to provide me with a copy of your permits, a soil analysis, a full environmental impact report. The noise from construction will be very disruptive to the native bird populations. She stared at us for a beat longer, letting her bureaucratic threats hang in the air. Then, with a silent, menacing hum, she spun the golf cart around and glided away, leaving us in a cloud of bewildered silence. Dave was the first to speak. What in the world was that about? Environmental impact report? We're using hammers, not dynamite. Mark was already looking worried, tucking the plat map away like it was sensitive material. She seemed serious, Jack. Oh, I knew she was serious. I'd seen that look before. It was the look of someone with too much time on their hands and a deep, unshakable belief in their own absolute authority over their tiny fiefdom. And there it was, the opening salvo. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't trespassed. She'd done something far more insidious. She'd weaponized bureaucracy, impact reports, covenants, sightlines. This wasn't going to be a fight with a hammer and nails. This was going to be a war of paperwork, of bylaws and veiled threats, and I had the sinking feeling I'd brought a butter knife to a laser-guided missile fight. The following Saturday, we arrived at the site just after 8 a.m. The air was cool and crisp, and the mood was electric with the promise of productivity. My truck bed was loaded with fresh-smelling lumber. Dave and Mark had coolers full of water and Gatorade, and two other dads, Mike and Tom, had joined our noble cause, bringing the total manpower of the Dad Brigade to 5. We were an army of flannel and good intentions. The sounds of progress soon filled the woods. The rhythmic scrape of shovels digging into the earth, the thud of mallets on stakes, the cheerful banter of men who were just happy to be outside and doing something useful. We were making real headway, clearing the ground and starting on the post holes. The smell of sawdust was just starting to mingle with the scent of pine. It was glorious. And of course it couldn't last. The hum returned. This time Carol's approach was faster, more determined. She skidded to a halt at the edge of her lawn, a conquering general arriving to survey the enemy lines. Today, she was armed with a clipboard and a thick, spiral-bound book with a laminated cover. She held it up like a shield. Pristine Pines, HOA Covenants and Bylaws was printed in an aggressive, bold font. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "This is a clear violation," she shouted, her voice sharp enough to split wood. "I'm officially citing you for a violation of Section 4, Paragraph B, nuisance abatement. Your noise is a nuisance." I put my shovel down and walked to the edge of the tree line, making sure to keep my boots on my side. "Ma'am, it's 9:30 on a Saturday morning. Your neighbor 2 houses down is using a leaf blower that sounds like a 747 taking off. That's noise. We're on our own property. We have a right to be here." She glared, her face tightening into a mask of pure indignation. For a moment I thought she might actually spontaneously combust. But her next move was far more cunning. She gave us a thin, vicious smile, turned her back, and marched over to a small green control box on her lawn. She knelt, flipped open the cover, and twisted a dial. A moment later, the entire border of pristine pines erupted. Every single sprinkler head along the property line, which had previously been watering the lawn in gentle, polite arcs, swiveled in unison. They were now aimed directly at our worksite, firing powerful, concentrated jets of water into the woods. It was a full frontal assault. "What the?" Dave yelled as a jet of water caught him square in the back. We were instantly soaked. The fresh earth we'd just cleared turned to sloppy mud. The post holes we'd painstakingly dug began to fill with murky water. Tools were getting drenched. Our neat piles of sawdust became sad, clumpy mounds. It was a strategic, brilliantly petty attack. Dave, his face red with fury, dropped his shovel. "That's it, I'm going over there." I grabbed his arm. "Whoa, hold on, big guy, don't. That's exactly what she wants." "She's attacking us with sprinklers, Jack." "I know," I said, wiping a stream of recycled lawn water from my face. "Don't sink to her level. We're better than this. And wetter. Much, much wetter." We were forced into a tactical retreat. There was no point in trying to work in the deluge. We gathered our soggy tools and loaded them back into the trucks, defeated. Through the shimmering wall of water, we could see her. Carol. Sitting on her golf cart, arms crossed, watching us with the smug satisfaction of a Bond villain who has just activated the laser. We had been open for less than 2 hours, and we had been routed by a sprinkler system. As I drove home, soaked and demoralized, I couldn't help but marvel at her strategy. It was brilliant, in a completely sociopathic sort of way. She hadn't trespassed. She hadn't laid a hand on us. She had weaponized lawn care. Sun Tzu would have been proud if Sun Tzu had been a middle-aged woman with a passion for aggressive irrigation and a deep-seated hatred of joy. Defeat is a bitter pill to swallow, but defeat by way of hostile horticulture is a special kind of humiliating. We weren't about to give up, though. The next morning we returned, slightly wiser and wearing waterproof gear. We were determined to work through any aquatic assault she threw at us, but Carol had escalated. The sprinklers were off, but a new, more formidable obstacle blocked our path. The narrow dirt track that provided the only vehicle access to the site was completely obstructed. She had parked her golf cart sideways across the path, its wheels dug into the mud. A large, professionally printed sign was zip-tied to the front windshield. In stark black letters, it read, "Private property, no trespassing." The sign was a lie, of course. The path wasn't on her property. It was a shared access lane, as clearly marked on Mark's now sacred plat map as the state of Vermont. "She can't do that," Dave fumed, his face turning a familiar shade of crimson. "We could just move it." "Don't touch it," Mark warned, his accountant brain kicking into high gear. "The second we lay a hand on her personal property, we're liable. We become the aggressors. It's the perfect trap." As we stood there, a trio of damp, frustrated dads debating the legal ramifications of golf cart relocation, the familiar sight of flashing blue and red lights appeared down the road. A local police cruiser rolled slowly to a stop behind my truck. 2 officers got out. They moved with a slow, deliberate pace that screamed, "This better not be another cat-stuck-in-a-tree call." The older one, whose name tag read Miller, had a magnificent mustache, and the profoundly weary eyes of a man who had seen the absolute worst of humanity, most of it involving disputes over property lines and barking dogs. His younger partner, Davis, just looked tired. "All right, folks, what's going on here?" Officer Miller asked, his voice a gravelly sigh. "We got a call about an illegal construction crew threatening a resident." Before I could even open my mouth, Carol materialized as if summoned. She came power-walking from her house, a cordless phone pressed to her ear, a look of deep distress artfully arranged on her face. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. "These men were so aggressive yesterday. They're building some kind of vagrant encampment right next to our homes. I'm afraid for my safety." I stepped forward, holding the Platte map like a holy relic. "Officer, my name is Jack. We're scout dads. We're building a shelter for our kids' scout troop." I pointed at the map. "This is our land, deeded to the troop. This is the access path. She's illegally blocking it. And yesterday she assaulted us with her sprinkler system." Officer Miller took the map. He looked at it, then at the golf cart, then at Carol's dramatic performance, and finally back at me. A long, painful silence followed. He'd seen this movie before. He knew how it ended. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Carol, his voice devoid of all emotion. "This appears to be a civil dispute. We can't force you to move your cart from an access path. That's for a court to decide." He then added, with the deadpan delivery of a master, "And we can't arrest you for watering your lawn." He turned back to me. "Son, honestly, this is a property line issue, a civil matter. My hands are tied. You need to talk to a surveyor, maybe get a lawyer. We can't do anything here." And just like that, they were gone. They got back in their cruiser and drove away, leaving us in a standoff with a golf cart. They had accomplished nothing, except wasting an hour of our Saturday and validating Carol's reign of terror. She stood by her pristine driveway, a triumphant smirk plastered across her face. She had won. Again. The crew's morale hit rock bottom. "This is insane," Dave said, throwing his hands up in disgust. "I'm done. I'm not spending my weekends fighting a crazy person." Mark was already hunched over his phone, his face grim. "I'm looking up hourly rates for real estate attorneys," he muttered. "We're looking at a minimum retainer of $5,000, and that's just to get them to write a strongly worded letter." The project was dead in the water. The lumber sat there, mocking us. Leo's disappointed face flashed in my mind. We were legally in the right, but practically we were completely and utterly screwed. The cops couldn't help us. Reason couldn't help us. The law, it turned out, moved at the speed of expensive lawyers, while Carol operated at the speed of pure, unadulterated malice. She had found the perfect weapon, the gray area, and she was painting the whole world with it in 50 shades of beige. Monday morning found me on my actual job site, the place where I earned the money to pay for things like scout dues. It was a world away from the silent, manicured lawns of pristine pines. Here, the air was filled with the roar of generators, the whine of circular saws, and the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of nail guns. It was noisy, dusty, and chaotic, but it was a chaos I understood. It was the productive chaos of creation, but my head wasn't in it. I was distracted, grumpy. I snapped at my apprentice, Rico, for a minor mistake, and grumbled at my foreman, Manny, about a lumber delivery being 10 minutes late. Manny, a man whose face was a roadmap of 50 years in the construction trade, eventually pulled me aside behind a stack of drywall. He was holding 2 steaming styrofoam cups of coffee. He handed one to me. "All right, boss, spill it," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What's eating you? You're wound tighter than a ratchet strap on a heavy load." And so I told him. I vented the whole absurd story. The scout project, the perfect lawn, the woman named Carol, the sprinkler assault, The golf cart blockade. The useless cops. The impending legal fees. Manny and Rico, who had wandered over, listened intently. Rico snorted with laughter a few times, but Manny just nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his weathered face. "That's messed up, boss," Rico said when I finished. He was a good kid, barely 20, full of simple solutions. "You should just go over there in the middle of the night and tow her little cart into the woods." Manny shook his head, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "Nah, that's what she wants. You touch her stuff, you lay one finger on her property, you're the bad guy. She's got you on video, she calls the cops again. And this time they have a reason to do something. She's playing chess, kid. You're trying to flip the board." He looked at me, his eyes shrewd. "Let me ask you something, Jack. You said this land, it backs right up to the National Forest, right?" "Yeah," I said, shrugging. "It's right on the boundary line." Manny tapped his temple with a calloused finger. "So, who's the biggest dog in that fight? Who owns that boundary? It ain't her. It ain't her little club of lawn-mowing fanatics. And it sure as hell ain't the local cops who are scared of a lawsuit." He leaned in a little closer. "You're fighting a land battle on the wrong front. You've been fighting her. You need to stop fighting the soldier and go straight to the general. You need to call in the cavalry that owns the real land." It was like a switch flipped in my brain. A glorious, beautiful, fluorescent light bulb flickered to life above my head. Of course, I had been so focused on the petty harassment, on the 200-foot border with her HOA, that I'd completely forgotten about the miles of border on the other side. I was thinking like a homeowner. I needed to think bigger. Carol wasn't just my neighbor from hell. She was potentially obstructing access and harassing people on land directly adjacent to federal property. She had picked a fight with a handful of dads, but she was standing on the doorstep of the United States government. Manny grinned, seeing the understanding dawn on my face. "There you go," he said, clapping me on the back. "Don't bring a lawyer to a land fight, bring a park ranger." I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen, a new sense of hope surging through me. I ignored my texts, ignored my emails, and typed 3 simple words into the search bar. The 3 words that would change the entire course of this war: U.S. Forest Service. A few days later, Mark and I were back at the site. The mood was cautiously optimistic. I'd spent 2 days navigating a phone tree that I'm convinced was designed by the devil himself, but I had finally reached a human being in the regional U.S. Forest Service office. I'd explained the situation, emphasizing the part about the blocked access path, which I now knew was a federal easement. They promised to send someone. A forest green pickup truck with the official shield on the door rumbled up the access path, the one now conspicuously free of any golf carts, and parked. We were expecting a grizzled, gray-bearded mountain man with a potbelly and a Smokey the Bear hat. The man who stepped out of the truck was not that. He was in his late 20s, lean and fit, with a calm, almost zen-like demeanor. His uniform was immaculate. His name tag read Ranger Thompson. He had a handshake like a vice grip and a dry-as-the-desert sense of humor that was immediately apparent. "Jack?" he asked, his voice calm. "You're the one with the hostile neighbor problem?" "That's one way to put it," I said. "Thanks for coming out, Ranger." We retreated to the tailgate of my truck, which I used as a makeshift desk. I was ready. This was my moment. Guided by Mark's meticulous organizational skills, I presented our case. We had a folder. It contained the plat map, a printed timeline of events, and glossy 8x10 photos Mark had printed at Walgreens. There was a picture of the sprinkler assault in progress, a picture of the golf cart blockade, a picture of the no trespassing sign. It was a masterpiece of suburban grievance documentation. Ranger Thompson listened patiently, not saying a word, his expression unreadable. He looked through the photos, studied the map, and read my timeline. When I was done, he just nodded slowly. Then he went to his truck and pulled out a ruggedized tablet computer that looked like it could survive a direct hit from a meteor. "Let's take a walk," he said. He walked the property line, his eyes scanning the ground while his tablet beeped and whirred. He was humming quietly to himself, a tuneless, thoughtful sound. He paid special attention to the access path, walking its length and occasionally stopping to stare into the woods. After what felt like an eternity, he stopped and turned to us. He tapped his screen. "Well," he said, his voice flat, "your map is correct. This is private land." He paused, and my heart sank. "However," he continued, "that access path you've been using, it cuts directly across a 10-foot-wide Forest Service utility easement. It's for our vehicles to access the fire monitoring station on that ridge over there." He pointed into the deep woods. "So, by blocking that path, she wasn't just blocking you. She was blocking federal access." He looked over at the pristine houses of the HOA. "And we've had complaints from this address before," he said, a flicker of something, annoyance maybe, crossing his calm face. "Complaints about hikers loitering on the trail. Complaints about woodpeckers being excessively loud in the mornings." "So what can we do?" I asked, desperate. "Can you talk to her?" Thompson sighed, a quiet exhalation of professional weariness. "Look, my jurisdiction is specific. I can't get involved in your private build on your private land, but I can and must protect the federal easement and prevent the harassment of citizens at the boundary of a national forest." He looked from me to Mark, then back again. "The problem is, I'm one guy covering 500 square miles of forest. I can't sit here all day to make sure she behaves." He paused, a slow grin spreading across his face. It was the grin of a man who had just found a loophole he could drive a truck through. "But you guys are here." He strode back to his truck and rummaged around in a large metal footlocker. He returned with a stack of something bright yellow. He handed one to me. It was a flimsy nylon vest with U.S. Forest Service Volunteer, printed in bold black letters across the back. He also handed me a very official-looking government-issue clipboard with a pen attached by a string. "Here," he said, handing out 4 vests in total. "Congratulations. You're now official Forest Service volunteers." He leaned against his truck, arms crossed. "Your mission," he said, and I could swear he was trying not to laugh, "is to continue with your project. If the individual from that property," he gestured vaguely toward Carol's house, "attempts to obstruct the federal easement or harasses you in any way at the boundary, your job is not to engage. Your job is to observe, document everything on this clipboard. Time, date, nature of the incident, everything. And report it directly to me. You are my eyes and ears. Understand?" I looked down at the vest in my hands. It was cheap, it was flimsy, and it smelled faintly of pine-scented air freshener and government bureaucracy. But in that moment, it felt like a suit of armor. It felt like a superhero cape. We weren't just a bunch of dads trying to build a shed anymore. We were the crew. We were deputized. We were licensed to document. Ranger Thompson hadn't given us a weapon. He'd given us something far more powerful. The one thing that could defeat a creature like Carol. The soul-crushing, awe-inspiring power of officialdom. The final Saturday had arrived. This was it. The day we would finish the shelter. But this time, our arrival was different. There were no tentative, hopeful feelings. There was only grim, hilarious determination. The Dad Brigade rolled up to the site, looking less like a construction crew and more like a very low-budget paramilitary unit. We all donned our bright yellow U.S. Forest Service volunteer vests. The effect was immediate and transformative. We stood taller. Our jaws were set firmer. I carried the official clipboard with an air of immense, unearned importance. Dave, who was born for this role, had appointed himself head of security and was directing my truck into its parking spot with exaggerated, sweeping hand signals, as if I were landing a 747 on an aircraft carrier. Mark, our new official scribe and records keeper, was walking the perimeter, muttering things like, "Calibrating the observation zone." It wasn't long before she appeared. The hum of the golf cart was our bat signal. Carol came gliding over her perfect lawn, her face a thundercloud, ready for battle. But she stopped dead about 30 feet away. She saw the vests. Her brain seemed to short-circuit. The righteous indignation on her face was replaced by pure, unadulterated confusion. What is this?" she sputtered, gesturing at our official attire. "You can't just wear those. That's impersonating a federal employee." I didn't even look at her. I turned to Mark, my voice loud and clear. "Mark, would you note the time, please?" 9:14. Subject has approached the federal boundary. Initial observation suggests an agitated state. Mark, scribbling furiously on the clipboard with a seriousness that would make a Supreme Court justice proud, replied, "Agitated, got it. Any specific verbalizations to report?" Dave chimed in from his post by a large oak tree. "I'm sensing hostility in her tone, and her polo shirt, a garish coral, clashes violently with the native foliage. Be sure to note that down for the report." Carol was flabbergasted. She was completely out of her element. She was used to being the one citing non-existent rules and lodging official complaints. Now her own tactics were being turned against her with a level of bureaucratic absurdity she couldn't possibly compete with. "This is ridiculous!" she shrieked. "Mark, please document the subject's statement," I said calmly. Quote, "This is ridiculous." Time, 9:15. She tried to argue about the noise, the dust, the general offense of our existence, but every time she spoke, one of us would just calmly ask Mark to document the subject's unsubstantiated claim, or record the subject's escalating vocalizations. We never made eye contact with her. We only spoke to each other, as if she were a strange creature we were observing for a scientific journal. Finally, in a desperate, last-ditch Hail Mary, she played her final card. "Stop!" she yelled, holding up her hand. "Stop everything! I saw it! I saw one!" "Saw what, ma'am?" I asked, finally feigning interest. "An endangered pine-crested vole," she declared triumphantly. "It ran right across your construction site. They are a protected species. All work must cease immediately pending a full federal environmental review." She held up her phone, displaying a blurry picture of what was very, very clearly a common field mouse. For a second, I almost broke, but I held it together. This was the moment, the checkmate. I gave her a slow, sad smile. I pulled out my own phone. "Carol, that's a very, very serious claim," I said, my voice dripping with mock gravity. "As I'm sure you know, it's a federal offense to knowingly disrupt the habitat of an endangered species. But it's also a serious federal offense to knowingly file a false report with a federal agency." I put the phone to my ear, having pre-dialed the number. "Hi, Ranger Thompson? Jack from the Scout Project here. Sorry to bother you on a Saturday, but we have a developing situation at the boundary." "Yes, sir. We have a civilian report of a code vole, I guess you'd call it. The reporting party is right here on scene. I can put you on speakerphone so she can give you her official statement." The color drained from Carol's face. All the manufactured confidence, the smug authority, it all evaporated in an instant. The thought of having to explain her pine-crested vole and present her blurry mouse photo to an actual no-nonsense federal ranger was clearly a horror she could not bear. She began to stammer. Well, on second thought, it was moving very fast. It was probably just a chipmunk, a large chipmunk, never mind." Without another word, She spun her golf cart around and fled, her retreat significantly faster and less majestic than her arrival. She didn't just drive away, she escaped. A beat of silence hung in the air. Then Dave let out a whoop of pure joy. We had won. Not with anger, not with lawyers, not with threats. We had won with yellow vests, a clipboard, and a masterful bluff. We had fought bureaucracy with bureaucracy and emerged gloriously, victoriously, absurdly. With Carol and her imaginary voles neutralized, a strange and wonderful peace settled over the worksite. The only sounds were the ones we made. The bite of a saw through a 2x6, the satisfying thump of a hammer driving a nail home, the easy laughter of men who had stared into the abyss of an HOA conflict and emerged unscathed. The work flew by. With no interruptions, no sprinkler assaults, no golf cart blockades, we became a well-oiled machine. Dave, freed from his security duties, proved to be an enthusiastic if slightly inaccurate sawyer. Mark, clipboard temporarily retired, discovered a hidden talent for ensuring every single joint was perfectly square. We were a team, forged in the fires of petty tyranny. The high point of the day, of the whole project, was raising the final wall. We had framed it on the ground, a skeleton of wood and nails. Now, it was time for it to stand. The 5 of us gathered around it. "All right, gentlemen," I said, "on 3. 1, 2, 3! With a collective grunt, we heaved the heavy frame upward. It rose slowly, awkwardly, until it slammed perfectly into place against the back posts. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. We held it there, panting, as Mike and Tom scrambled to nail the temporary braces in place. We stood back, admiring our work. The banter was light, triumphant. "I'm telling you guys, I'm putting Forest Service Volunteer Special Operations Division on my LinkedIn profile," Dave declared, puffing out his yellow-vested chest. Mark, ever the accountant, nodded seriously. "I've already run the preliminary numbers. Our project efficiency and team morale increased by a factor of 4.7 post-deputization. It's a proven management strategy. I might suggest it at the firm's next quarterly review." We all laughed. We spent the rest of the afternoon putting on the roof sheathing and cleaning up the site, the conversation constantly circling back to our victory. We made plans to frame one of the yellow vests and present it to Mr. Abernathy at the next scout meeting, along with our official, heavily annotated incident report. As the sun began to dip below the trees, casting long shadows through the woods, we put down our tools for the last time. We stood in a loose semicircle, looking at what we had built. It wasn't perfect. A few of the boards weren't perfectly flush. The roof had a slight dip in one corner that only a contractor's eye would notice. It was rustic, it was handmade, but it was solid. It was real. It was a testament to our ridiculous journey. A shelter built not just of wood and nails, but of frustration, ingenuity, and a healthy dose of spite. It was a monument to petty victory. And I had to admit, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever built. A week later, the site was transformed. The smell of sawdust was gone, replaced by the rich, smoky scent of a crackling campfire. The Adirondack shelter, our hard-won prize, stood proudly at the edge of the clearing, looking like it had been there for 100 years. This was the payoff. The scout troop was finally having their campout. About a dozen kids, my son Leo among them, were chasing each other around the fire, their faces sticky with marshmallow and illuminated by the dancing flames. Their laughter echoed through the quiet woods. They were telling ghost stories, their voices a mix of feigned bravery and genuine excitement. They were being kids, completely unplugged and gloriously wild. Later, as the fire died down to a bed of glowing embers, Leo came and sat next to me on the edge of the shelter's wooden floor. We leaned back against a post and looked up. Without the light pollution of the town, the sky was a black velvet blanket punched through with 1,000,000 diamond-bright stars. "This is the best campout ever, Dad," Leo said quietly, his head leaning against my shoulder. "The shelter is so cool. I can't believe you really built it." "We built it, Bud," I corrected him. "The whole crew." I looked out from our little haven. On one side was the vast, dark, mysterious expanse of the Green Mountain National Forest. On the other, through the trees, you could see the perfectly spaced, perpetually lit houses of pristine pines. As I watched, I saw a light flick on in an upstairs window of the house I knew belonged to Carol. A silhouette, recognizable even from this distance by the severe shape of its head, appeared for a moment, and then the blinds were snapped shut with what I imagined was a great deal of force. A small, satisfied smile crept onto my face. The other dads and I were sitting a little ways off, passing a small metal flask of very good whiskey between us. We were retelling the story, of course. In the space of a single week, it had already become legend. The sprinkler offensive, the golf cart standoff, the Great Vole Bluff. With every telling, our vests became more heroic. Ranger Thompson's deadpan wit grew sharper, and Carol's defeat became more epic. I looked at the blazing embers of the fire, at the kids passed out in their sleeping bags inside the shelter we had built, at the vast, starry sky above. We hadn't just fought an HOA president. In our own small, ridiculous way, we'd fought for the simple idea that kids deserve a place to be kids. That a little bit of wild, a little bit of dirt, a little bit of imperfection is infinitely better than a perfectly manicured lawn. We came here to build a simple shelter, but we ended up with a story that was anything but. And I had a feeling the legend of the deputized dad crew of Troop 86, the unlikely heroes of the HOA wars, would be told around this campfire for a long, long time to come.